Today on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, I talk with Lynn Yulee, writer of the Nightcrawler episode of X-Men the Animated Series, and how being a believer made that episode possible. Lynn Yulee is a fantastic and prolific animation writer. Having written over 200 episodes of various animated shows, he's worked on many of the nerdy cartoons that you've probably seen, including things like Darkwing Duck, Iron Man, Static Shock, Avengers, Justice League, Ben 10, VeggieTales. It's so many more. But for the Christian nerds, he's probably best known as the writer of the Nightcrawler episode from X-Men the Animated Series. It was amazing to connect with him, but before we get to our interview, let's read some scripture. Let's start with Colossians 3:23 through 24. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. And 2 Timothy 2:15. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. Lynn is a great example of someone who uses his talents to entertain, as well as, whenever possible, to share the truth of the gospel. The Nightcrawler episode shows he was not afraid to share his faith, and in his own words, he was chosen to write it because those around him knew about his faith. Now, let's get right into my interview with Lynn Yulee. Lynn, it is so great to have you on the show today. So tell us a little bit about who Lynn Yulee is.
Well, that could take days, but I'll do the short version. I'm a native of Los Angeles. I have always wanted to be a writer. I was a writer before I knew I wanted to be a writer. I think the first script I wrote is in a box somewhere. It was a Star Trek because, I was a fan, and I was writing musicals and student films in high school and college, and I had my first sale, professional sale, when I was a junior in college. It was an episode of a show no one remembers called Holmes and Yo-Yo. It was on ABC for 13 weeks. And then a year after that, in my senior year, I had a TV series format optioned. It's sort of like a mini Bible for a TV series. And that was, about the first black president of the United States. Like that could happen, right? But it was 1977, so it was a little ahead of its time. And so I said, oh, well, look, I've had 2 sales already before I got out of college. This is going to be easy. Rocket to the moon. What a career I'm going to have. And then 3 years of radio silence after that. So, first breaks, followed by more first breaks, followed by, work here and there. I was lucky early on, but really learned how to be a writer over several years, and then accidentally became an animation writer when I was writing industrials, corporate films and stage shows. And one of the mom and pop companies I worked for, the pop was an actor named Michael Rye, who was the voice of Duke Igthorn on the Gummy Bears. And so he introduced me to Jim Magon, who was the story editor on the Gummy Bears, and I got to write 1 Gummy Bears and then 1 DuckTales called Where No Duck Has Gone Before. You can see a pattern forming here, right?
Nice. Well, hey, before you go any further, you said you wrote for Gummy Bears. Yeah. I just had Katie Lee on the show, who was one of the voice actors for Gummy Bears.
Yes, so basically we were starting more or less, she probably had started a little earlier, about the same time. And so, our paths have crossed from time to time as well. But anyway, so then I got signed on a multi-year deal at Disney TV Animation. That was the beginning of my animation career. And that's what I've been doing basically ever since, occasionally getting some live action work, but mostly in animation. And so it's been a living, I've been very fortunate.
Amazing. Well, talk to me a little bit about writing for animation, because I know, you mentioned you've done some live action, but not a lot, mostly animation. Is there a major difference when you're writing something for animation versus writing something for live action?
Well, let's see. Outside of the fact that you're paid 50% or less for each script, and you get no residuals, in most animation, there are the primetime, the Fox animated shows that are under Writers Guild deals, but most animation is not written under the Writers Guild, though they're making efforts. If you're under Local 839 of the IATSE, this is getting really into the weeds right away. Your fans are going to be thrilled about this. Like if I wanted a primer on labor relations, I would have tuned in another episode. But anyway, so you're writing. The process of writing is very much the same. Some animation scripts are a little more detailed in terms of stage direction, but we're all using the same software. We're all using probably Final Draft, and we're all writing dialogue and stage direction. And there's the difference is you're sometimes, but not always, directing more on paper in TV animation, particularly when I was starting out, when it was almost like each script was like shot for shot. You really had to really direct on the page, which is anathema when you're writing live action. They will give you the boot straight away if you do that. So writing, the process is the same. Breaking stories is the same. Yes, you're writing for a talking duck or a person in long underwear, but quite frankly, writing for people in long underwear is $1 billion business for a lot of the studios. So, it's a matter of animation often is the test bed, the proving ground for these giant franchises. I mean, as we've discussed off camera, I've written for most of these superheroes. I wrote on the X-Men series, and I wrote on lots of DC stuff. All of it is writing for these same characters, but they are separate sort of parallel worlds when it comes to writing the cartoon version and then the live action stuff. There's very little crossover in terms of the creative personnel, but that's an issue for another day. Anyway, so I'm not sure I answered your question.
Oh, that's I think you did well. Now you actually just mentioned the X-Men. So why don't we jump into that, because that's part of the reason I wanted to get you on the show. For those who are not familiar with Len's name, Len was the writer for the X-Men animated series episode called Nightcrawler, which a lot of my Christian nerd fans will be familiar with that episode. If they've never seen any other X-Men animated series episode, they've probably at least heard about this one with the things that happened with Nightcrawler and with Wolverine in that episode.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about this story. First, how did you get on writing for the X-Men animated series? Because you wrote a couple of episodes. Was this the first one?
No.
Or was that one of the later ones?
Yeah. Well, I have to sort of roll back a bit. As I said, I was on staff at Walt Disney TV Animation for 5.5 years. And one of the other writers that I knew there and became friends with, good friends with, is Eric Lewald, who was the showrunner on X-Men. And he left Disney before I did, some years before I did. And when I ended my time at Disney TV Animation, fortunately, Eric had already been running the X-Men animated series. He was sort of the writing showrunner. And then there's Larry Houston, who was the director-producer. So Eric was responsible for all of the scripts and sort of designing that approach to that world. And so at the end of their third season, after I left Disney, Eric gave me an opportunity to write my first episode, which was called Cold Comfort. And Cold Comfort was the introduction to a character called Iceman, Bobby Drake.
Yeah.
And that was a great episode for fans because it introduced a lot of the other characters. We saw a flashback of the X-Men in their early sort of weird jumpsuity bits, and there was also X-Force, and it was a fanboy field day on that episode. And that was a great deal of fun. And a lot of that is because Larry Houston is this encyclopedia of Marvel details. So, he said, oh, we need to have this guy and that guy. And Eric and I worked together, and that's the script I wrote. Anyway, so then in what was their fourth season, I think it was the first episode of the fourth season.
That's what it's listed as on Disney Plus.
Right. And so I got a chance to write Nightcrawler. And so this will get into some of the stuff that's germane for your audience. But I had been going through a discernment process in terms of religion. We can sort of get into why that happened. But Eric knew that it was good casting. He knew that this was a topic that was interesting to me. This is the thing. I want to really be very clear to you and to your listeners. I am no religious expert by any stretch. I came to faith, such as it is for me, in adulthood. I was, raised not in any particular denomination, but after a family tragedy, after the death of my mom, I ended up at a church and felt at home and began the process of sort of feeling out that world because, I'd always had an interest. One of my favorite films growing up, or miniseries, was Jesus of Nazareth. Now, why did that move me so much? I don't know. But stuff like that always sort of piqued my interest. Anyway, so there I was, sort of finding my feet in a church, and Eric knew that, so he knew I could sling the lingo sufficiently. So, and so I became. Eric was extremely good at casting a particular writer for a particular topic, and so he said, "Okay, there's this character that we want to use in the series." And he knew that he gave me the opportunity to write about Nightcrawler. And I did some digging on the character and his appearances in the comic books. And then it was an interesting process because initially we were very timid. We did your basic X-Men adventure story. And there was Nazi machine guns and snowmobiles and all kinds of dumb stuff. But by then, 4 seasons in, Eric and the people he worked with had sort of proven that they could handle all sorts of interesting topics in a serious way. They weren't going to be frivolous. They weren't going to be do anything that would reflect badly on Fox Kids and all that sort of thing. So they had the full support of Margaret Lesh, who was the head of all Fox Kids, and Avery Coburn, who was the standards and practices supervisor, and she was totally on board. And we had the executive who worked under Margaret Lesh, named Sydney Iwander. And Sydney, after we turned in our first sort of story treatment on this thing, said, no, I want to hear about a loving, giving God. What is all this other nonsense? So we pared it down. So God bless Sydney, right? So
absolutely,
he's a fascinating character. He's sort of a curmudgeon and deeply, deeply cares. He's sort of the network executive on the Batman the Animated Series. So he knew his comic book stuff backwards and forwards. And he is kind of a scholar of all things, including New and Old Testament. Anyway, so we pared it down to a much simpler story, and it got down to basically a dialogue about faith and loss of faith. Faith with a character who has every reason to be cynical, who, because he looks like a demon, right? Nightcrawler.
Right.
Kurt. And you would think, okay, well, this is a guy, if he has any reason to be cynical and unhappy about his lot in life, that would be the guy. But no, he has profound faith. Okay. And meanwhile, you have Wolverine and dire and horrible things have been done to him. So he has whatever faith he may have had, whatever interest in faith he may have had, that's all been stripped away. So here he meets this guy who is so convinced that God is looking after them. And it was like, oh, that's a great dramatic situation. We have two people with diametrically opposed perspectives, and they can talk about this. And of course, we still have to do an X-Men adventure where, there's dramatic stakes and violence to some extent and things like that. So it was a wonderful opportunity. And yeah, a lot of people still remember this episode fondly. It was probably the first mainstream cartoon to deal with issues of faith. Yes, there had been Davy and Goliath and all the other stuff that may have come before. And then later, there was...
Things that were explicitly Christian.
Yeah, I wrote for Veggie Tales. I wrote 12 episodes for a story editor named Sean Roach on a show called Superbook. Here's the teacup to prove it. And I worked on a British series called Friends and Heroes that was created by a Methodist minister back over in Britain. That was a cool show because they flew us over for story meetings in London several times. So, nice. That was a non-repeating phenomenon, but fondly remembered. And like I said, I wrote on Veggie Tales in various iterations. So I've had this weird, first one was something called Adventures from the Book of Virtues. That was a long time ago. I did a couple, 3 of those. So I've had this weird parallel career when I've been working on, DuckTales and Tailspin and, Ben 10 and all sorts of other. I did 2 American Tail home sequels, and so I was writing for a Jewish mouse. So that I cover all the bases. I wrote on a series that we never saw here in the U.S. called The 99, which was a superhero show, but created by a gentleman in the Middle East. Anyway, it's just I've been able to work on a lot of interesting shows. A lot of them, the secular shows, Static Shock, I mentioned Ben 10, wonderful experiences. But there's this, parallel thing where I've done some of these shows that you and your listeners enjoy sometimes, I hope.
Definitely. So you kind of went into it a little bit, the story of this particular X-Men episode.
Right.
So this was... somebody else had already kind of started, we want to use this character.
Yes.
And was it their intention all along to bring out this? It sounds like one of the producers was more on the line of, I want to tell more of the religious story there.
Well,
because you said their initial pitch was turned down.
Because, it wasn't, it was so like, we didn't know how far we could go. Eric is an academic, a student of history and literature and things like that. Really smart guy, the showrunner of this, Eric Lewald. And, but we'd all read enough about all of these characters that we were using because there were, source material provided by Marvel Comics. And so we were able to, we sort of honed in on what this show was about. And it was not, the notion of doing something like this was a little bit groundbreaking. And so we didn't know how far we could go. And then, the executive from Fox Kids said, go further. And the standards and practices woman, Avery Coburn, she agreed. And she said, I trust you, to Eric. And I'm just a freelancer. I'm coming in and doing one-offs. I'm not on staff. There was no staff really on the X-Men series. So Eric was, moving all these chess pieces to get all of these episodes made. I don't know what they did, 78 or something like that. So it's each episode had to have its own sort of internal logic and also be part of the greater arc. And the third episode I did was called Bloodlines, and that was about Nightcrawler again. And that was an exploration of his relationship with the mother he didn't know he had, who was Mystique, who's one of the big villains of that world. And, we got into why she was so profoundly dysfunctional. Again, the worst kind of villain in the world is the one who says, "Moo ha ha, I shall take over the world." Who cares? But you understand why Mystique is the way she is, and it's she's a horrible person. But the nice thing about writing anything really, live action or animated, is when you get into the stuff that's below the surface, that explores the human condition. I mean, it doesn't matter if I'm writing for a bear in a flying outfit, or if I'm writing for, people on a procedural drama, though I haven't had that opportunity. But you are always writing about human feelings, human experience. Otherwise, nobody's going to care. It doesn't matter what the visuals are. If they're all wonderful and exciting and things are exploding, nobody gives a darn if it's not about something that touches you. And in the case of the work I've done on X-Men, with talking about an unresolved father-son dynamic with Bobby Drake and Professor X, or the religious dynamic debate between Wolverine and Nightcrawler, or the unresolved, unhappy childhood of Nightcrawler and why he was seeking out his mother and then forgave her for what she did. Those are all important things. I've been very fortunate to work for a lot of story editors, showrunners, who have given me a chance to do stuff that's about more than everybody after the treasure, and that there's a place for that. I love those romps too. They're fun to write. But, working for Alan Burnett on Static Shock, got a chance to write. I did an episode about a character who was homeless and mentally ill, and so you could delve into that a little. And it happened to be a holiday-themed episode, so that all got tied in together. Alan and the great Dwayne McDuffie, for whom I later worked on Ben 10, they wrote an episode about gun violence. A kid brings a gun to school. They won a Humanitas Award for that. Once in a while, cartoons actually can have and really move people. And when you rolling back now, sorry, I've digressed, but going back to Nightcrawler, when we were going to conventions, I would go there with Eric and his wife Julia, who was also a writer on the X-Men series, and Larry Houston, who was the producer-director of the series. We would have these panels, and people would come up and they would say to us how much the show meant to them. One guy came up and it was really extraordinary. It was like one of the last San Diego Comic-Cons we attended. This guy who came up there, he looked like Jack Black dressed as Wolverine. Really, stocky guy, sort of done up with the lumberjack clothes, and he had the blades and the whole thing. And he told us it was so powerful for us because he said, I had a rough childhood, but I came to I stuck around, he said, because I wanted to see what the next episode was of X-Men. Okay. We just think we're writing a show and we're entertaining people, but it becomes really important to folks. And there have been people who've come up to me about the Nightcrawler episode and said, this gave me a chance to discuss something with my dad that I couldn't talk about before. One guy said he became an evangelical person somewhat because of this episode. And I'm saying, whoa, not my job. Hold on. But nevertheless, it's humbling. It makes you sort of like say, wow, what we do is not just filling the space between the commercials. It has meaning for people. And that's an extraordinary feeling. I mean, we also like residuals, but that's another topic that we've discussed previously. But anyway, it is really nice that people like what we do. And I've been very fortunate. I've been able to do this for several decades now. And one of the examples of a show that people remember fondly is the X-Men series and this particular episode of Nightcrawler. Anyway, I've rambled on too long. You probably have another question to ask.
Well, let's dive into this idea a little bit. You've talked about, you've dealt with some pretty heavy subjects on what most people would consider a kid's show.
Right.
When you're writing something like that, are you thinking, I want to write this for kids, Or or do you think that overall children are actually more prepared to talk about these subjects than some people think they are? Or do you think it's more of a the audience is broader than, I just want to write what is meaningful to me, and I'm going to put it on the page, and I'm going to put it out there, and if it connects, it connects, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. How does that work? All of that.
All of that. Here's the thing. The dirty little secret is we always write to entertain ourselves. Anybody that does any creative endeavor, you're doing it. You've got to become and be engaged by the material. Otherwise, it's not going to be very good. Getting a chance to write any story that's put out in a mass medium, the responsibility is to be entertaining. And if you get to be thought-provoking and you get to write stuff that will keep the parents entertained as well as the kids, because, let's face it, there are people who just plant their kids in front of the TV as a babysitter, but you're also hopeful that the parents and the kids are watching together. And if the parents want to stick with it, we've slept through, when our daughter was young, we slept through a lot of Pokemon stuff, but not knocking it. I wish I had a piece of the action, let me tell you. But it's like we get a chance to do something that engages people. How great is that? What an opportunity! What a privilege that is, So yeah, we're writing for ourselves, and we're again at the same time we're also cognizant of the sort of the target audience. I'm not going to write a film about a cartoon about drug addiction on My Little Pony. Maybe there are people who know how to do that. I probably couldn't. I mean, some jobs lend themselves, some shows lend themselves to serious topics, and some do not. And the worst thing you can do is trying to do a very special episode on a show that just can't carry that. Having said that, however, I think there is more opportunity on more shows than sometimes the people who make those shows or the people who provide guidance to the networks and the studios give kids credit. I think kids do get a lot more than the experts think. But then I'm not a psychologist. They have data to back up their perspective, and I just go by my gut. Because I remember when I was quite young and watching, let's just say, Warner Brothers short subjects, the Bugs Bunny stuff. Some of that was very adult, and it was because it was designed to be a short subject in a movie theater. It was for an entire family audience. Everybody who went to the theater saw that show at the same time. So when we watched it on television, it was like, okay, some of that goes over your head. But then you want to know what that means. You're reading Mad Magazine when you're 7, and you're saying to yourself, I don't get that joke, but I know it's supposed to be funny. Why is it funny? And you begin to sort of develop a taste, a sense of humor, and an interest in more stuff, more what does that content mean? And you grow up into it. So when we're doing a show like working on something like Ben 10 or Static Shock, and we can do big, funny, silly bits, and then we can do serious stuff. I was very fortunate, like I say, Alan Burnett I worked for on Static Shock, the brilliant Dwayne McDuffie, who co-created Static Shock and created Milestone Comics. Dwayne passed in 2011, and it's a terrible loss because he was absolutely a bona fide genius, terrific guy. And so you get a chance to have people who are saying, okay, let's do something different. Let's expand the boundaries. It's a wonderful privilege. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, it's like, oh, wow, I get to flex different muscles, And so I'm very, very fortunate that I've been able to have a chance to do that on several occasions for various shows. I'm a storyteller. I'm not an educator. I'm glad to have a chance to write things that matter to people. It really is. Listen, it's a privilege to be able to write for any medium. It's something I aspired to from the get-go. And I'm doing it. It's not where I expected to be. I wanted to be a sitcom writer. When I went to UCLA film school, I wanted to be a sitcom guy, and everybody else wanted to write the screenplay to change the world. They all ended up doing our drama and probably made more money. But the fact is, I got lucky, and I've been able to maintain a career longer than had I stayed a middling sitcom writer because, yeah, after age 40 and your hair turns a certain color, you're not considered funny anymore. But in animation, I've been able to continue going, and I've won some awards. You see one of them behind me and things like that. And I'm glad. I'm lucky. I'd like to keep it up for a few more years, but I'm very fortunate that I've been able to do this and entertain people of all ages, as they say.
Awesome. Well, let's go here. Because you've mentioned it. You've mentioned both shows a couple of times. How did you get involved in Ben 10 and Static Shock?
Okay. Well, I had worked with Alan Burnett, who was the showrunner on Static Shock, when we were both at Disney. And then he went off and started. Basically, Alan is the undersung hero of all things at Warner Brothers Animation. He ran all of the shows for many, many years on the script side of things.
So that explains the connection with Milestone.
Well, no, that's Milestone. That's Ian McDuffie.
Okay.
Alan Burnett, he'd been a writer on Smurfs, and then he came to Disney at one point. Smurfs was Hanna-Barbera. And, Alan's retired now, and we all miss him because he's absolutely the best at what he does. He's this calm, quiet center in any storm. People are running around with their hair on fire, and Alan will walk into the room. He'll resolve the story question in moments. Everybody will calm down. He's a lovely guy. Anyway, so Alan went from where I met him at Disney TV Animation. They went over to run Batman the Animated Series and Superman and Justice League and all those things. Anyway, so he was the guy that when I was, freelancing, having left a staff situation, he brought me on at first freelance and then staff and then freelance again on Static Shock. And I got to write 16 of those. And, again, I got a chance to do some really wonderful, popular episodes on that show. And since Static had been created for Milestone Comics by Dwayne McDuffie, who had come in to Warner Brothers Animation, and then became like a meteoric rise. He became one of the showrunners on Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. And then he left Warner Brothers and he went over to Cartoon Network to run a reboot of Ben 10, which had been about a young Ben Tennyson. And then he aged him up, and I got to write on 3 series of Ben 10. I worked on, I got to look it up again because I always get the names wrong. I worked on, here we go. Sorry. Ultimate Alien and Alien Force, Ultimate Alien, and those 2 were run by Dwayne, and then he passed. And then his widow and his best friend from high school and college, Charlotte Fullerton and Matt Wayne, ran Ben 10 Omniverse. So I got a chance to write 24 of those shows. And particularly when I was working with Dwayne, we got a chance to do stuff that was fascinating. I did a flashback episode that got me a Writers Guild nomination that was just, kind of like our version of Terminator. It was really great fun to do. We just did all sorts of interesting things, funny stuff and dark stuff. I did one that was kind of like a noir bit towards the end. And it's just, again, because you have story editors, showrunners who are fearless and confident and have the trust of the people who are paying the bills, it gave folks like me who were, freelancers, an opportunity to do things that were beyond the everybody after the treasure episodes, the silly rompy bits. On the other hand, way back when at Disney, I did an episode of a series that I actually co-created, but that's another debate for another time, called Bonkers. And we'd written the show and the episode had been produced, the executive in charge at the time said, "We have no business doing episodes like that." And it was a show about a sibling rivalry between two sisters. Okay, well, you see, okay, if that's what you think, I think Disney has done other things since that are a little more emotional, obviously. But at that time, that was his sort of approach to things. But to me, it was like, okay, I know that I can at least try to write stuff that is a little deeper. And so I want to be able to do that. And so after I left Disney, I was given that chance with Eric Lewald on X-Men and Alan Burnett on Static, Dwayne McDuffie, and even more recently on a wonderful show. I don't know if you've seen it, called Thunderbirds Are Go. It was a reboot of the puppet show from the 60s.
I'm familiar with the. I'm more familiar with the old one than I am with this new one. But I did notice the new one.
It was CG. It was absolutely brilliantly produced by a guy named Rob Hoagie, terrific story editor. In fact, I'm going to suggest to your viewers, if any of them have Apple Plus, they should see the show Rob is currently doing called Stillwater. It is the most extraordinary, touching, calming, beautiful, again, spectacular production series.
I saw some of the CG work on it, and it looks beautiful.
Absolutely gorgeous. And Rob has done several series where it's like, how does he get these wonderful productions? Because you've gotten to write at least one episode, correct? I've written 3 of Stillwater.
Okay.
There's 1 or 2 that need to be that will be on the air yet.
Okay. That I was going to say only one's listed on IMDb.
That's right, and the other 2 are coming in another season. And
gotcha.
But I probably shouldn't be talking about it, but I did sign an NDA. I'm in trouble now. But it is an absolutely beautiful show, and it is about mindfulness. And in this crazy busy world we all live in, and especially for the younger viewers who are seeing this, to dial it down and to think and pause and reflect. It's not religion per se, but it is something that I think is very nourishing for the soul of the children and the parents watching it. They've had Peabody and Emmy wins and nominations, and it's an absolutely glorious show. Really, highly recommended. On the other hand, I've also written for Dork Hunters from Outer Space, so don't take my word for anything. I'm not kidding.
That is a brilliant title.
Yeah, it wasn't a brilliant show, but work is good. So,
well, I will say I live in the world of Star Wars, talking about Star Wars and Star Trek and Marvel and DC, and and I know you've done a lot of Marvel and DC stuff.
Yeah.
Did you grow up as a Marvel fan or a DC fan?
Yeah, I was a comic book collector for mostly DC.
Okay.
So it was, Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Justice League, all of those things. That's what I collected when I was a kid. I stopped reading comic books a long time ago, unfortunately, but that was the basis. And so I ended up writing more Marvel stuff than DC stuff, though I've done some. I did 1 Justice League. I did 1 The Batman, one of the later versions.
Right.
But the closest I've come was working on Static Shock because, and this is a fun bit of experience, one of the episodes I wrote for Static Shock was called The Big Leagues. Look it up. And it was a crossover episode, the first crossover episode with Batman and Robin and the Joker. So I got to write dialogue for them and, for the guys who do those voices, including Mark Hamill. So that was cool.
Nice.
So talk about crossing the streams. So that was very, very much fun. And again, thanks to Alan Burnett, I got that kind of an opportunity to work on that show. It was really one of my favorite experiences working at Warner Brothers on Static.
When you do stuff like this, you've done a lot of one-offs, like you said. When you're working freelance and stuff like that, are you doing a lot of research into who the characters are beforehand? Is that stuff that's just kind of, here's a bunch of stuff, go read it? Or is it more of you've already kind of been following this show, and at least you know something about it? How
It
does
depends on which
something like that
show.
work?
I mean, if you're a freelancer like I've been most of my career, you're in a situation where if the show has been on the air, you watch as much of it as you can, and that's easier now with all the streamers repeating everything.
Oh yeah.
If you are getting in on the ground floor of a series, you might read a series Bible. You might see the first episode's script. There might not be a produced pilot because of the lead time in animation. So you're doing as much research as you can. And then your showrunner and you will, sometimes there's what's called a writer's summit where everybody gets together and sort of talks out episodes and things like that. Or sometimes the showrunner has ideas that he would or she would like to have produced, and so you get, I'd like to do that one, or he'd like you to do that one, or whatever. Sometimes you come in and pitch ideas. Each series is handled differently, but at the end of the day, you're sitting down with the boss and you're breaking the story. You're figuring out what the story beats are each scene, and then you go off after you've worked it out on a whiteboard or notes or whatever, and then you go and you write up a treatment, or you write up a story outline, and that gets bounced and revised, and then you get notes from all the powers that be, and then you get to write the teleplay, and then you write the teleplay again, and maybe a third time, and then they take it and they do their magic to it, and then it goes through this ridiculously complicated process of storyboards are drawn and voice tracks are recorded and everything's shipped overseas to do the animation, and it comes back many months later, and the freelancer's completely out of the loop for any of this. So it's sort of like, oh, is my episode in this season? Why, yes, it is. Oh, good, I get to watch it. And so, it's a surprise to everybody. Fortunately, I've been able to work for a lot of really top-notch people, and so the product generally comes back really good. Like I mentioned, the stuff I've done for Rob, and the stuff I'd done on Static and Ben 10, really top-notch productions. And I also, like I said, I got a chance to do some home videos a few years ago for Universal, and those were pretty well produced. I enjoyed those. I enjoyed the process of doing those, and I enjoyed the final product. There's so many. I've done a lot. I can't keep track of them all, but I've been very lucky to have some things that people remember fondly, and I have a shelf full of the DVDs to prove it. DVDs, for the younger people, that's kind of like streaming, but it's a physical thing. And above that shelf, there's VHS tapes, and you'll have to ask your grandparents about that. Anyway, I digress.
So tell me this. You've done a lot of 30-minute shows.
Yeah.
Have you done very many features? Is there a major difference between writing, say, I was starting to get involved with filmmaking before, and the people, my audience knows about my wife's illness, and I had to step away from a lot of things when she got ill, and I was starting to really get into the filmmaking industry here in Oklahoma, and I made a couple of short films myself, directed a couple of short films. I'm not much of a writer personally, so I would have writers on that would help write the scripts, and then I'd be like, hey, let's fix this, let's change that to kind of mold it into what I really wanted the story to say. But they really did all the bulk of the writing. Mm-hmm. But is there a big difference between writing, say, a 30-minute show versus a feature length, something that's like 90 minutes or 2 hours long? And and now movies are like 3 hours long, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, yes, the process is the same. The structure of the episode or TV series obviously are very different, but basically I mean, it's all beginning, middle, and end finally, but it's really compressed. If you're writing a script, when I started at Disney TV Animation, our scripts were like 40 some pages long because, like I say, you were really directing on the page, shot for shot. These days, you wouldn't do that at all. The average half-hour episode, which is really only 20-some minutes, is about 20, 25 pages, maybe. So much more succinct, much more, this is, again, getting into the weeds, but much more master scene. You know, you don't go into copious detail. You're not culling out shots, things like that, because you're leaving it to the director and the board artists to do that. So, you know, and certainly that's the case if you were writing live action. But in terms of writing, like the home videos that I mentioned, which were feature-length home videos for Universal, I did write one VeggieTales that got produced. I ended up with a co-writing credit on Noah's Ark. That was the last home video that was released on DVD. I also wrote another one, which I thought was great fun, called The Road to Bethlehem, which was basically, you know, Bob and Larry as Hope and Crosby.
That would be awesome.
It was great fun. I'm very proud of it. It'll never see the light of day because they've done. I've actually written a couple of episodes for a series called The VeggieTales Show, which is a new iteration of that as compared to the stuff that you saw on home video. They're doing this, and this is for Trinity Broadcasting, and it's on some other streamer, and I can't remember the name of it. And so, you know, I did a couple of episodes of that, you know, League of Incredible Vegetable stuff. So I could do the superhero bits with, you know, with those characters. And that's a lovely cast of characters. You know, I mean, the VeggieTales characters, the Muppet characters, I've never worked for them, unfortunately. You know, all the Warner Brothers, you know, Bugs and Daffy, I got to write for them kinda on a show called Lunatics Unleashed, which was sort of a younger version, futuristic version of that. You know, and obviously all of the superhero characters for Marvel and for DC. You know, these are all wonderful, you know, giant canvases upon which one can write one's little script. I'm mixing metaphors there, sorry. But, you know, really is kind of like you get a chance to work with any of these characters and you're saying, what fun. As to your point, however, writing a screenplay is, when you're writing an episode of a series that's ongoing, you kind of know who the characters are because of what others have done with those characters. Now you have to bring your own take on it to the work, but you also have to sort of fit within the confines. Don't write an episode of, let's say if there was a Terminator series, don't make it a musical comedy. Okay? Don't be smart. You know, follow the rules of that world to the best of your ability. And sometimes, listen, most of the time I'm pretty much on target. There, I'm sure, been times, and you could probably talk to people who would say that, oh, no, I kind of missed that target by a country mile. You know, this happens, you know. But, you know, I've written 230-some, 260-some episodes. You know, that you can't hit the bullseye 100% of the time. So shame on me. But when you're writing for those shows, you've got a template. When you're writing an original screenplay, with American Tail, there were two features with those same characters. So I knew how to use those characters in the stories I told. When I'm writing an original screenplay, I have actually an original screenplay that I've just started disseminating. It's a finalist in a screenplay competition.
Yes, I read about that.
Stage 32 family-friendly screenplay contest. So we'll find out who actually wins the contest February 11th. So I've already dated this broadcast. Sorry. Anyway, so that is by many orders of magnitude more difficult because you're creating that world and you're creating those characters and you have to really dig deep unless you really want something that's just a lot of things going boom. But since I was writing a comedy drama, it's kind of a low budget comedy drama about family, and yes, there's a touch of faith in it. You know, if it ever sees the light of day, I'll be thrilled, but who knows? That is people, unfortunately, the internet has become everybody's a critic. Everybody knows better than the people making the movies, the TV shows. You know what? It's an impossible thing to get anything made. And if you're fortunate enough to get anything made, good for you. I say give more credit where it's due, because everybody can snipe and quip about, well, I didn't like that episode, or, oh, that Mandalorian was a disappointment, or Boba Fett. Oh, Boba Fett is getting all the. Hey, come on! Have you watched it?
I haven't done my review yet of that one.
I mean, honest to goodness. Okay, you don't like it? That's too bad. They made something that's extraordinary. Just the production value.
Yes, absolutely.
So don't be a wise guy. I want to say to all these people, hey, well, that's not how I would have done it. Well, fine. Do better. This is a ridiculous job to have. I mean, I'm really lucky. On all my contemporaries, we're really lucky to be able to do this. At the same time, it does require a particular set of skills, to quote another movie franchise entirely. And you don't get to that just by saying, here's how I do it. There's a tremendous amount of talent, yes, but also craft and determination. It's not for the faint of heart. It's a business of rejection. So anybody that gets a film made, even if it's a film you don't care for, okay, that's nice. Somebody else obviously liked it well enough to spend millions of dollars to make it. There must be a reason. Whatever that is, business or creative, there's a reason that thing got shot. Isn't that extraordinary? So, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's quite all right. That is quite all right. I'm right there with you. And I'm the first to say I am not a writer. I have tried. I have given up. I am a director. I will probably never be a writer, but that's okay.
Well, I'm not much of a director, I will admit. My directing skills stopped in high school when I was doing those musicals and saying, guys, come on. That's not a directorial approach to get work, but then that's okay, because I am a writer. That's basically what I do. And I love doing it, and it's frustrating, and it's challenging, and it's the only skill set I have, basically. Other than that, I have to go back to work in the drugstore like I did in high school, which I don't want to do. Though the blue jacket was very attractive at the time.
Nice.
But, let's not go there. But I'm very... Writing is hard work. As I say to young writers, if you have aspiring writers in your audience, writing professionally is, if I can talk you out of it, you shouldn't do it. If I can talk you out of it, you might have a shot at it. If you want to have homework 24/7 for the rest of your life, this is the job for you. If you don't want to collaborate with anyone, anything like in the creative mediums like film or television, that's not the business. You should be a sculptor, because it's just you and the marble. But if you want to be in this kind of medium, you have to collaborate. You have to be willing to compromise. Yeah, you can stand for what's important to you, but you also have to know that other people have. There are very few people who could say my way or the highway in production of television and film. There are, giant 800-pound gorillas who can do whatever they please. Most of us cannot. Most of us are working slobs, and I'm one of those working slobs. I got this award not because it's a Writers Guild Award, and it's a kind of a lifetime achievement-y kind of thing. And I'm with a lot of people who also won that award, who have done, created television series and been real titans of the animation business. The Matt Groenings and Sam Simons and Seth MacFarlane's of the world. And if you did a bell curve on, it was Sam Simon who co-created The Simpsons, and then me, and then Seth MacFarlane. That was the income disparity. There is breathtaking. I'm a rounding error in their lunch money, but I'm just a guy who got to work in a strange business. I'm very fortunate. but I didn't change the course of human history. I've entertained people, and when you talk about Nightcrawler and other episodes I've done to people, like that's a gift. I'm so lucky that I got a chance to do that. I'd like to do more of that sort of thing, but who's to say? I guess that depends on how this year goes, right? We've all had our challenges in the last couple of years with the pandemic and all that sort of thing. So the business has changed tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
Writers are working from home. They're not working in writers' rooms, much at all. Maybe that'll change again, probably will. But, a lot of people figured out that work from home is a doable thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, for those of us who are freelance, we're used to it. For those who are used to staffing, it's been a kind of a gear shift. So, who knows? Throw the deck of cards up in the air. Who knows how it's all going to land at the end of it?
I surely don't. Well, yeah. Lynn, I want to honor your time. It has been great having you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely a blast. And thanks for, putting out some great content over the years. And I will say Nightcrawler is by far one of my absolute favorite episodes of X-Men animated series.
That's very kind of you. I agree. I like it. And it's a half-hour cartoon. Could we have gone deeper? Could we have had more content, more human drama in it? Sure, but we're talking about a 22-minute episode. So I'm very lucky that people think fondly of it, and I don't know what to say except thank you to all of the people that are seeing this for watching shows like that and remembering them fondly.
Well, thank you for helping make it happen
on Disney Plus, by the way.
Exactly.
But anyway, so thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it and for your interest, and I'll look forward to watching this when you've got it all cut together.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
All right, you take care.
I loved talking to Lynn about his experience writing for so many different animated series. If you want to keep up with what Lynn is currently working on, follow him on Twitter at Lynn Yulee. And I'll put a link to his Twitter down in the show notes below. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, share, follow, click all those buttons down there, whatever they are, and so that you can keep up with us as we release new content. And you can find all of our social links to our YouTube channel, and to our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. And while you're there, click on the support tab. We would love to have you as a Patreon. Before we go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Philippians 1. And this is my prayer: that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. We'll see you next week. Blessings.